In the stillness of night, Moscow was suddenly torn awake. Sirens wailed across the capital, their piercing cries echoing through empty streets and crowded neighborhoods alike. Overhead, streaks of light cut across the black sky as the deep growl of engines filled the air. Within moments, a city long regarded as impenetrable found itself under siege. Explosions thundered across districts, rattling windows and sending shockwaves through the ground. Glass showered from apartment towers onto the asphalt below, scattering across once busy boulevards. What had begun as a single alarm quickly transformed into an all-out assault, one that shattered Russia's sense of security at its very core. For the first time in generations, the heart of Moscow itself was no longer untouchable. At precisely 3 a.m., the fragile silence that cloaked the city was ripped apart. Air raid sirens screamed, joined by the sharp metallic hum of drone engines cutting low across the sky. Those sleeping in cramped apartments and sprawling luxury blocks alike were jolted awake by the sound. Some ran to windows in confusion, others froze in dread. In just minutes, a metropolis of over 12 million people was thrust into one of the largest drone onslaughts in its history. Ukraine had unleashed more than 90 uncrewed aircraft in a coordinated strike, a wave that swept over the city. Like a sudden storm front, Russian authorities were quick to announce that air defense systems had intercepted the majority of the incoming drones. Yet the reality on the ground told a harsher story. Fireballs erupted over rooftops, shockwaves ripped across streets. More than a few drones had pierced the defensive shield and reached their marks. This was no strike confined to remote suburbs or industrial fringes. This time, Moscow's very core, its high-rise residential blocks, its gleaming business centers, its crowded thoroughfares felt the violence directly. At least 7 central districts reported confirmed hits in the opening wave. Apartment windows imploded inward, shockwaves tore doors off their hinges. Vehicles parked along narrow streets erupted in flames, their fuel tanks detonating in chain reactions that illuminated the sky. The cityscape began to resemble a war front. Smoke curled upward in black plumes, blotting out starlight. Flashes of orange and white marked the places where drones had smashed into targets. The destruction was unnervingly cinematic, a vision more often associated with distant battlefields than the capital of a nuclear power. Eyewitnesses described the detonations as endless, one blast rolled into the next, a relentless rhythm of violence. Online, videos emerged of fire crews struggling through smoke-choked streets while terrified residents clutched belongings and fled into the night. The fear spread faster than the fires. No one could predict where the next strike would land. Entire neighborhoods trembled with the awareness that war had not just brushed the city, it had arrived directly at their doorsteps. For Moscow's citizens, the horror was no longer abstract, no longer confined to news bulletins or battle maps. The conflict had crossed into their lives, uninvited and unrelenting. For the Russian government, that night was more than a physical attack, it was a test of control. Sirens blared without pause. Families huddled in basements or crowded stairwells, searching for safety where little could be found. Emergency vehicles jammed intersections, their flashing lights lost in the glare of fires consuming blocks at a time. Phone lines collapsed under the weight of panicked calls. A capital once seen as fortified and untouchable now revealed itself to be vulnerable, its defenses struggling against a new era of warfare. The assault was not just a strike of metal and fire, it was a message. Its scale, timing, and precision carried a chilling clarity. This was no random barrage. It was deliberate, calculated, designed to shock even the most hardened observers, and it succeeded. For ordinary Muscovites, the illusion of distance from the war evaporated. They no longer watched events unfold from afar, they stood inside it. Yet the fragments. Streets once lined with shops and cafes dissolved into rubble and smoke, shattered glass-coated sidewalks like ice, vehicles burned in clusters, their twisted frames igniting secondary fires that spread uncontrollably. Every new detonation piled fresh destruction onto a city unprepared for such relentless violence. Apartment complexes bore the heaviest toll. Families stumbled from bedrooms into hallways thick with dust. Mothers clutched children while fathers tried to force open jammed doors. The concussive force of nearby blasts cracked plaster walls and ripped steel doors from their frames. In some districts, flames leapt from car to car, engulfing entire parking lots in searing heat within minutes. The night became a panorama of chaos, each scene underscoring the same reality. Moscow was not safe, not even at its core, and the strikes reached beyond just homes and streets. Critical infrastructure came under pressure as fires spread and systems buckled. Power lines were severed as chunks of falling debris crashed through the city, plunging entire neighborhoods into sudden darkness at the very moment when light was most needed. Across several blocks, residents stumbled through pitch-black streets, their only illumination the glow of distant flames. Hospitals, struggling under the surge of injured victims, relied desperately on emergency generators that faltered under the strain. Communication towers were also struck, silencing phone networks and leaving thousands unable to reach their loved ones. On the outskirts of the city, the danger escalated when a fuel storage facility was hit. Firefighters fought a frantic battle to contain the spreading flames, aware that even a single explosion could trigger a chain reaction across the industrial zones nearby. Each new blaze stretched already exhausted crews thinner, forcing them to make impossible choices about where to deploy their dwindling resources. Eyewitnesses compared the scenes unfolding before them to something out of a nightmare. Videos circulating online showed towering building facades collapsing after impact, cascading rubble into the streets below. The air was filled with the unbroken wail of sirens, giving the impression that Moscow itself was under siege. Families rushed down stairwells, children clutched tightly in their arms, while others shielded elderly relatives from shattering glass. Panic deepened with every detonation, fueled by the gnawing uncertainty of where the next drone would strike. Social media became a flood of pleas for information, with residents begging for guidance and reassurance. For the first time in decades, Moscow appeared exposed, vulnerable not just on its edges, but even within its historic and central districts. Explosions rattled nerves far beyond the impact zones. Smoke spiraling into the night sky reminded residents that their defenses had failed. The psychological toll was immense, the sound of blasts reverberating through the city, the acrid smell of burning fuel, and the realization that the next strike could fall on a school, a shopping mall, or a crowded metro entrance created an atmosphere of dread. Normally lively streets, filled with traffic and late-night life, fell eerily quiet. Only the flashing lights of ambulances and fire engines cut through the haze, guiding emergency crews toward yet another crisis. As flames burned across multiple districts, the attack's reach became unmistakable when it hit the very arteries of the capital's air traffic system. Within minutes of the first detonations, Moscow's three major airports, Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Sheremetyevo, announced emergency closures. These bustling hubs, which typically process tens of thousands of passengers every day, were transformed overnight into silent waiting halls crowded with stranded travelers. The paralysis of air traffic was not merely an inconvenience, it was a stark symbol that the assault had pierced deep into Russia's transportation network. In a matter of hours, the numbers spoke volumes. More than 130 flights diverted to distant cities, at least 60 others delayed for hours, and countless passengers left circling above or grounded on unfamiliar runways. Airlines scrambled to redirect aircraft, triggering a ripple effect that disrupted schedules across the region. Families waiting to reunite were told to return home empty-handed, while business travelers missed critical connections. The economic damage mounted with alarming speed. Moscow's aviation authority estimated millions of dollars lost within. Are airlines paying for the additional fuel of rerouted flights, compensating passengers, and covering emergency lodging? Airport operators faced repair bills of their own, with parts of runways and fuel infrastructure damaged by debris. The chaos spilled into logistics as well, with cargo flights carrying vital goods for industries and retailers forced to divert or delay. What began as a military strike had now rippled into Moscow's commercial lifelines, disrupting the very supply chains that kept its economy functioning. Beyond financial losses, the psychological blow of shuttered airports was even greater. These terminals had long stood as symbols of Russia's strength and its link to the wider world. Yet, for one night, they stood defenseless, forced to close not by weather or accident, but by an enemy's attack. Images of departure boards filled with cancellations, unsettled citizens, a chilling reminder that the war had reached the capital's core. The question on many lips was not just how, but whether such shutdowns would happen again, leaving Moscow isolated from the outside world. Inside the terminals, the human cost of uncertainty was clear. Videos showed overflowing waiting. Areas where frustrated passengers demanded answers, while loudspeakers repeated announcements of diversions. Own skies. This level of disruption was not achieved through brute force alone. Ukraine had employed a calculated strategy and innovative swarm tactic that overwhelmed Russia's trusted air defense grid. It was a demonstration that even Moscow, with all its layers of protection, could be brought to a standstill in the course of a single night. The magnitude of the Moscow attack was measured not only in raw numbers, but also in the complexity of its design. Ukraine did not simply launch a handful of drones, it orchestrated a carefully planned swarm offensive. Waves of unmanned aerial vehicles were dispatched simultaneously from multiple directions, each wave following a unique path. Some drones skimmed close to the ground to avoid early detection, while others climbed to higher altitudes, creating overlapping layers of threats. This multi-directional approach overwhelmed Russian defenses, which suddenly faced dozens of fast-moving signals that all appeared equally dangerous. The brilliance of the strategy lay in its reliance on deception. Ukraine deliberately sent certain drones on diversionary routes, fully expecting them to be destroyed. These were not failures but sacrifices, decoys meant to confuse radar operators and lure surface-to-air systems into wasting valuable ammunition. While Russian interceptors and gunners targeted these distractions, the main strike groups slipped through, advancing deeper toward Moscow. In effect, Ukraine transformed the airspace into a battlefield of misdirection, forcing Russia to commit costly mistakes at every stage. Military observers described the entire operation as a chess match in the skies. Every drone launch and every sudden maneuver compelled Russian defenders to react, often at a steep cost. A particularly striking aspect of the engagement was the imbalance between the value of offense and defense. Russia fired interceptor missiles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars apiece at drones that were built for only a fraction of that cost. The financial logic of the battle favored Ukraine, as cheap yet effective technology forced Russia to disproportionately expensive countermeasures. Electronic warfare added another critical layer to the strike. Reports suggest Ukraine employed jamming equipment to scramble radar systems and disrupt communication links across Russian defenses. By transmitting powerful interference signals, they were able to carve out temporary blind zones where real drones could move undetected. Simultaneously, operators dynamically adjusted drone routes in real time, exploiting weaknesses as soon as they appeared. The integration of technology, timing, and tactical flexibility turned the attack into far more than a simple aerial raid. It became a demonstration of modern asymmetric warfare. The effectiveness of this strategy was underscored by the fact that several drones successfully bypassed Russia's most advanced air defense platforms, including the S-400 missile system and the Pantsir S-1. These weapons are publicly celebrated as symbols of Russian military pride, yet they were unable to neutralize every wave. Verified footage and eyewitness testimonies later confirmed explosions within the Moscow city area itself, proved that Russia's supposedly impenetrable shield had visible cracks. For Moscow's residents and the wider world, this was not just a military outcome but a psychological one. Even with cutting-edge weapons, the capital could not claim complete safety. The vulnerabilities revealed by this strike are likely to reshape how Russia allocates resources for future defense. Analysts emphasize that the true significance of the attack lies not only in the physical damage inflicted, but also in the lessons it demonstrates. Ukraine showed that an outmatched force can still confront a larger, stronger adversary by combining inexpensive tools with innovative strategy. The key lesson, according to experts, is that reliance solely on costly high-tech systems may falter against swarming, low-cost, high-volume attacks. This principle resonates far beyond Moscow, raising alarms in capitals worldwide about the security of their own urban centers. Beyond the battlefield, the attack carried symbolic weight. By proving that drones could strike Moscow, Ukraine punctured the narrative of invulnerability that the Kremlin had carefully cultivated for years. The symbolism of reaching the Russian capital resonated almost as powerfully as the explosions themselves. It sent a message that modern warfare is not decided purely by large armies or massive missile arsenals, but by adaptability, creativity, and the willingness to exploit weaknesses. In the immediate aftermath, Russia's leadership reacted in a way that has become familiar by seeking to control the story rather than address the reality. The Kremlin's first priority was not transparency, but narrative management. Official statements declared that the strikes caused little damage and that defenses had operated successfully. State-controlled television networks amplified this line, repeating assurances that Moscow remained calm, safe, and fully protected. The goal was clear: to prevent panic and preserve the appearance of strength. Simultaneously, authorities cracked down on independent voices. Social media users who uploaded footage of burning buildings, shattered windows, or damaged vehicles soon found their posts deleted. Others reported pressure to remove their content voluntarily under threat of legal consequences. Despite these efforts, short video clips recorded by ordinary citizens continued to circulate online, showing fires and explosions across different districts of the capital. This created a jarring disconnect between what people witnessed on their screens and the sanitized version presented on official broadcasts. Censorship, a well-established tool in Russian governance, thus became another arena of conflict. Officials dismissed viral footage as fabricated or exaggerated, attempting to undermine the credibility of everyday witnesses. Yet such denials only deepen public skepticism. When residents can see smoke rising with their own eyes but are told nothing happened, trust in state institutions erodes. Once doubt takes root in the public consciousness, it is exceedingly difficult to erase of a nation guarded by unmatched defensive power. Acknowledging that Ukrainian drones could reach the city center would severely damage that image, exposing vulnerability where strength was supposed to be absolute. The recent events have once again raised pressing questions about the effectiveness of Russia's highly expensive and heavily advertised defense systems. For leaders who have built their legitimacy on projecting power and control, admitting to any form of weakness carries not only political costs, but also risks to their very authority. Every intercepted drone that slips through the cracks becomes more than just a tactical failure. It becomes a symbolic blow to the image of invulnerability that Moscow has long tried to maintain. Beyond the military dimension, another significant layer of the incident was the battle over international messaging. Russian officials and diplomats moved quickly to reassure both domestic and foreign audiences that the attack was minor, almost insignificant, and that Ukraine was desperate for attention. They framed the assault as little more than a publicity stunt designed to generate headlines rather than a meaningful strike. Yet international media outlets carried a very different story. Photographs of flaming cars, shattered windows, and frightened residents, combined with eyewitness testimonies, directly contradicted Moscow's narrative. These images traveled across the globe within hours, making it clear that the Kremlin's version of events was not being universally accepted. The confrontation between official statements and independent reporting underscored once again how information itself has become one of the most powerful weapons of this war. The consequences of this information struggle extend far beyond one night of explosions. In states where censorship and narrative control dominate, a dangerous gap often emerges between public perception and the official truth presented by authorities. Over time, that gap corrodes trust, fuels resentment, and deepens cynicism. For many ordinary Russians, watching their leaders attempt to hide visible destruction left the impression that the government cared more about protecting its image than protecting its citizens. This realization may not alter the course of the war overnight, but it will inevitably shape the long-term political and social landscape within Russia. The hidden costs of the drone assault were not measured only in shattered glass or burning vehicles. They included economic disruptions, psychological scars, and social instability damages that the authorities could no longer fully conceal. Preliminary assessments placed the financial toll of the attack somewhere between 1.8 and 3 million US dollars. That figure covered destroyed vehicles, damaged infrastructure, and the cost of emergency repairs. While such numbers may appear small when set against the scale of Russia's entire economy, their impact on the daily life of the capital was profound. Moscow prides itself on being the secure heart of the nation, an untouchable symbol of stability. To suddenly absorb millions in damages from a single night of chaos was a symbolic blow that cut deeper than financial spreadsheets could capture. Businesses were among the first to feel the pressure. At least 30 companies reported disruptions. Logistics firms struggled to move goods through damaged routes. Restaurants were forced to close due to sudden power outages, and smaller neighborhood shops saw their daily revenue collapse by as much as 40%. What began as one night of chaos quickly turned into a chain reaction. Deliveries were delayed, customers stayed home, and confidence in the stability of the capital eroded. For investors, the attack was a stark reminder that Moscow is not immune to the shocks of war, no matter how insulated it may appear on the surface. Yet, the economic consequences tell only part of the story. The psychological impact was perhaps even more significant. For residents of Moscow, witnessing explosions in the heart of their city shattered the illusion of safety. Families who had once believed that the conflict was confined to distant battlefields now felt its heat directly at their doorstep. Parents kept their children home from school. Professionals avoided offices located near high-profile targets. The attack reshaped behavior and routines, reminding everyone that fear spreads faster than fire and leaves scars long after the flames are extinguished. Public services were also strained to the limit. Hospitals were forced to treat civilians injured by flying debris. Fire brigades battled blazes across multiple districts throughout the night. Transport networks slowed as delays mounted, and police set up checkpoints that further disrupted the flow of workers across the city. Each of these emergency responses carried hidden costs: staff overtime, fuel expenses for emergency vehicles, and lost productivity across industries. These expenses, while less visible than shattered windows, compounded the economic burden created by the strike. Observers have noted that the social and psychological reaction may prove as consequential as the financial statistics. When citizens begin to feel unprotected in the very heart of their nation, they lose faith in leaders who have promised them security. Rumors of additional strikes spread rapidly, fueling anxiety in communities already burdened by inflation and shortages. Even if the material losses seem modest, the erosion of public morale could leave a far greater and more lasting impact. Ultimately, Ukraine's target was never just Moscow's economy or its morale, it was the political symbolism attached to striking the capital. The attack was not solely about burning cars or disrupting flights. It was a calculated effort to send a clear message: Moscow is not untouchable. By hitting the symbolic heart of the Russian state, Ukraine reminded both Russia and the world that modern warfare knows no safe zones. The Kremlin's seat of power itself could be touched. For Ukraine, the operation carried immense symbolic weight. It was an attempt to challenge the myth of Moscow's invulnerability, to shatter the illusion that distance alone could serve as a shield. It declared that, in this conflict, even the center of Russian power is vulnerable. The strike was as much about the message as the material damage, a bold and deliberate signal that the war has reached the capital and that Russia's strength is not as absolute as it claims. Each drone that managed to break through Russian defenses struck directly at President Vladimir Putin's carefully cultivated image as the ultimate protector of the homeland. For years, Russian citizens had been assured that their leader would shield them from any outside threat. Yet the reality of explosions shaking several Moscow districts told an entirely different story. The symbolism was unmistakable. If Russian missiles can hit Kyiv, then Ukrainian drones can strike Moscow. This new sense of symmetry, even if modest in scale, reshaped the psychological balance of the war. Beyond the symbolism, the operation served a practical purpose. The drone waves tested Russian air defenses in real time, approaching from multiple directions to overwhelm and expose weaknesses in Moscow's costly missile shields. Despite the presence of advanced Pantsir and S-400 systems, numerous UAVs reached central areas. This fact undermines the Kremlin's claims of total control and reveals vulnerabilities that Ukraine can study for future operations. At the same time, these breaches forced Russia to divert more resources toward defending its capital, further stretching its already pressured military. Yet the attack was not aimed solely at military defenses. Strategically, the raid also targeted the confidence of Russia's political and business elite. Moscow is not just the seat of power, it is the country's financial heart, home to banks, energy giants, and state corporations. By igniting chaos in the very core of this network, Ukraine sent a pointed reminder to those who benefit most from Putin's system: they are not untouchable. For the wealthy and the powerful, watching flames near their offices carries a far sharper sting than news of distant battles at the front lines. On the diplomatic front, Kyiv also sought to send a message. Despite pressure from Washington not to expand operations deep into Russian territory, Ukraine demonstrated its determination to act on its own terms. By taking such a bold risk, Kyiv reminded its partners that it will not passively wait for outside help. This move raises the stakes in international debates, ensuring that Ukraine's struggle remains front and center while keeping global support from fading. Still, the political shockwaves of this strike may prove even more consequential than its tactical results. For ordinary Russians, the idea